The Zora Neale Hurston Trust presents the It's All About Zora series. We'll be discussing all things Zora with artists, academics, and fans of Zora Neale Hurston on the It's All About Zora series. Plus, we will uncover her influences on our guests' lives and work. So let's get the conversation started. All right. Hello, Dr. Kendi. My name is Rae Chesny. I'm a Zora Neale Hurston Scholar, and I am interviewing you today on behalf of the Zora Neale Hurston Trust. Thank you for joining me for this conversation.
Of course. It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
So let's get into this. I'm really excited. I actually have the book right behind me. I'm always curious about how people first encountered Zora herself, even beyond her work. Could you tell me a little bit about your first experience or encounter with Zora?
I think my first major encounter with Zora was as a freshman in college at Florida A&M University, where I took an English 101 class, and my professor assigned all the classic books from African American literature, which included Their Eyes Were Watching God. And of course, I was just truly captivated by that book. And in many ways, that book and other books that I read that semester started really my life of reading, because I didn't read much in high school and middle school. My parents still like kid and joke on me to this day, because they're like, "You're an author? Like, you weren't even reading in high school and in middle school." But it was Zora and other, of course, classic African American novelists who really unlocked the door to reading to me. And once that door was unlocked, everything followed that led up to this day.
Thank you for sharing that. I was a reluctant reader as a child as well. So I get that same surprise. Zora converted me. I think with Magnolia Flower being a children's book, it's important to say, like, hey, we recognize that there are reluctant readers, and we're excited to offer you this book and offer you Zora at an early age. Can you tell me what Zora and her work means to you personally?
Zora and her work is a demonstration of someone who personally and especially through their work was able to show and affirm the fullness of the humanity of Black people. There were other writers during her era and even to this day who were trying to prove that Black people were human through their writing. It was an assumption in her literature that Black people were human and their culture was rich. There's something about when a person walks into a room with an air of confidence about themselves, despite what other people may think about them. And in a way, like, her literature was and is that person that unapologetically, I know I'm just as equal and human as anyone else. I don't even have to prove it. And so whenever I start questioning myself, whenever I start questioning Black people, I always know I could return to Zora's work where there's no question.
I think that that's a very powerful statement to share about Zora and her work, that she gives us pride in being human as not just Black people, but people throughout the African diaspora. Now, I have to be honest, when I saw that this project was happening, I was like, man, that has to be intimidating. You're adapting the short stories of Zora Neale Hurston. Can you tell me a little bit about what that process was like for you?
It was intimidating for me too. It's scary because, of course, we're talking about a legend. We're talking about someone who chose words very carefully. And also, I know how beloved Zora Neale Hurston is, rightfully so. So I want to do right by her literature. I want to do right by all those who love her. But I also want to do right by children. And I think the motivation for me was, I think I tried to stay focused on young people and how this create an opportunity for young people to meet Zora at a younger age. And I think that motivation allowed me to overcome my nervousness and if anything, sort of open the doors to opportunity and constantly thinking about even my 6-year-old daughter and how wonderful it would be for her to read a story adapted from Zora. I think all the while it was a scary, and it's still scary, right? Because if Zora returns, I have no idea what she's gonna say. I know she's gonna tell me what she really thinks.
Yes, she could be intimidating in that way, even in spiritual form, right? So we'll have to use your daughter's judgment to
Yes.
counter any concern about that. But I have a feeling Zora would be very proud. I will tell you, I have a 5-year-old son. We read both Magnolia Flower, the short story, as well as your adaptation, and he loves it.
That's great.
When we talk about Magnolia Flower and Zora's history as a trained anthropologist, which was something very significant during the Harlem Renaissance during 1925 through the 40s, it's a very interesting thing for a Black woman to be in our history. When we think about Magnolia Flower being published in July of 1925, it actually predates any of Zora's anthropological work, but it touches on these important concepts of race and intercultural relationships and love stories. Can you talk about what that meant to you or how that made you feel to know that Zora was doing that all the way back in 1925?
It just really shows her genius. It also shows her willingness in 1925 to create like an Afro-Indigenous character. Her willingness to create a character who's going to defy her father, and who is going to really be the agent in the love story. Because oftentimes, as you know, in love stories and heterosexual love stories, the man is the agent. The man is the one who knocked down the door and quote saves the day. And no, Zora created a character who was ensuring that her and John got together. And I thought it was fascinating how everyone feared Bentley. Everyone feared her father, but not Zora,
Mhm.
not Magnolia Flower. I don't know whether you got this, but I felt almost a little of Zora's own personal story in the
Mhm.
character of Magnolia Flower.
Absolutely. And I would ask you, as a girl dad, can you relate to that? Your students might be afraid of you, but your
Yeah,
6-year-old daughter is not intimidated at all.
nope. She is not intimidated one bit, and she has no problem telling me no.
I love that. And yes, I absolutely agree with you. I think it was interesting for me. I always play with this idea of the relationship between Zora and her own father, how it manifested with him being mayor of Eatonville 3 times, the pastor of Macedonia Missionary Baptist Church. So he was the big guy in town, and she was the one who stood up to him. So I absolutely think that's one of the things that is special about Zora. She's not afraid to be vulnerable in inputting herself into her work.
Actually, now that I think about it, and about ultimately part of her standing up to her father was
Yep.
leaving Eatonville. Similarly, how Magnolia Flower, leaves, and then
Mhm.
comes back like Zora did.
Yes. Funny enough, she still named this character John, the love interest John, but her older brother was also named John. So we'll have to
Oh
talk
wow.
offline about maybe of that because they were close throughout their lives. For you, how is Zora's work different than other Harlem Renaissance contemporaries, especially, say, the king of the Harlem Renaissance, Langston Hughes?
I think what's most obvious is no one was writing about or collecting the folklore of rural Black people in the 1920s and 1930s. And at the same time, writing stories about Northern and urban Black people and doing both effortlessly and understanding the intricacies, the expansiveness of the types of characters and the settings of her novels and her books. I just don't know of anybody who had that level of range.
I totally agree. I often find myself in debates about that. And I think that's Zora's special gift to us. She made us into people. I am an author myself. And anytime you write a story, adapt a story, it's one thing to picture it in your mind. But then when you see that book with the illustrations, let's talk about Wise's beautiful capture of Magnolia Flower because that was something the short story doesn't have. It doesn't have any imagery or images. What was your reaction to seeing those illustrations?
I was blown away because part of the reason why I wanted to adapt Magnolia Flower was because the story, particularly as we adapted it for children, was just so beautiful. When I first saw the illustrations, and they were just so beautiful. I mean, it was just so evocative and indicative of the story itself. I'm just in awe of Lovis Wise's artistry. I just think that we really owe a debt to Lovis Wise because, as you stated, I would argue that my job adapting Zora's short story was easier than Lovis Wise's job because I had words. Like it's not as if she was adapting, illustrations. I had to literally
Mhm.
create the world through Zora's words, and so I just thought it was incredible how they were able to do that.
One of the things that I love about the adaptation is that the honoring of nature, which is an intersection between Afro folklore as well as indigenous folklore. Can you talk a little bit about even reading a short story in Zora's description and personification of nature?
Well, that raise was one of the reasons why I was excited about adapting this text. And when I was thinking about how to pare it down or focus it for children, it was largely about really trying to bring Zora's depiction and descriptions of the natural world and these natural characters, whether it's the river, or the brook, or the leaning trees, to life, and to really have the story be anchored on the natural world and show the relationship, which I think Zora was speaking to in the original short story, and I wanted to make it plain for young people, was to show the relationship between love and nature. And so there's a line in the text that says, nature knows nothing of death. And there's another line in the text that says, love knows nothing of death.
I love that you captured that, especially, even in today's world, we move so fast. So to slow down and have that relationship with nature and to instill that in children at a young age, I think is very important. And again, I think Zora will be proud because, as you probably know, she was a gardener her entire life. And so her love of nature comes through her writing just like it does. Magnolia Flower was Zora Neale Hurston's favorite flower. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
So I'm gonna ask, was it intentional to pick Magnolia Flower as the first adaptation because it was Zora's favorite flower, but now you're telling me you didn't know?
I just need to talk to Zora scholars every day. Yeah, I did not know.
Yeah, I know quite a bit. So well, it works out like that, and I do find, especially Zora, as the embodiment of literary energy, ancestral energy. She absolutely makes what she wants to happen happen, whether you think it's your idea or not, right?
Exactly. And actually, my mother has been a lifelong gardener as well. And
Wow.
my grandmother was also a lifelong gardener. And I think my great grandmother, who I think was born around the time Zora was also, a lifelong gardener. Certainly, it's something that's been in my family.
I love that. Yeah, it sounds like a little sustainable activism. We're connecting the intergenerational groups with the land again. So you are the anti-racist research guy, Dr. Kendi, and you're writing this children's book, Magnolia Flower. Can you talk a little bit about the intersection between your previous works and Magnolia Flower?
So one of the things I've been trying to convey is what people should think about when they understand that these different racialized groups are equals. What that means to me is not that white people are perfect and Black people are perfect too. And let's prove that Black people are just as great as white people. What it means is that first, there's no real such thing as these hard lines between Black people and white people from a racial standpoint. And then secondly, those who are identified as Black or white or Latinx or Asian or other racial groups, that what makes these groups equals are their imperfection, that we're all humans. In addition to that, part of the ways in which we demonstrate our humanity is in some of the most difficult and oppressive and violent places and spaces, we still find love and joy. And so in the story of Magnolia Flower, where you have one of her parents fled the Trail of Tears, another of her parents fled slavery, and she was born into this maroon community, and she witnessed during her lifetime the emergence of a second slavery, after the Civil War. But despite all of that, she still, and Black people and Indigenous people and Afro-Indigenous people still found love. There's something profoundly connective about that I think allows people to see the equality of humans. And so that to me is the connection between sort of my anti-racist research.
I love that, rehumanizing everyone, even through imperfection. And I think that kind of flows into the next question perfectly. When we talk about present day, right? I think as a writer, that's always your worst fear, that your work will only be worthy of present admiration while you're alive. But Zora's work has survived years. And so when we think about Magnolia Flower, what is the implication on present day times with the storyline?
This is a very challenging time to be alive. I think adults are regularly, particularly adults in the United States, but even in other countries, are constantly wrestling with and worried about and stressed out about all the political and economic challenges of our time. And I don't think we realize that all that stress is also weighing on our children. Our children, too, are worried and concerned. And then many children are sort of surrounded by these tragedies. And I'm mentioning that because I think that one of the things that Zora conveyed famously is I'm not tragically colored. I think that this story, like Zora Neale Hurston's work more broadly, conveys to children that despite tragedy falling onto your family, you are not a tragedy. Despite people telling you you're nothing, you are something. And I just think in this moment, in these difficult times, those are the types of messages that our children need to hear indirectly. And they need to see young people who are finding joy in the midst of pain. They need to see human beings who are striving for love despite it all. And I just think it'll bring them a sense of peace and joy and love, in these difficult times.
I 100% agree. And I will tell you that I think the adaptation is just like Zora's work, and children in different age groups, they'll continue to read it and get different things because the movement of the story goes from young girl, young man in love to full circle, coming back to this special place in nature and remembering and then hearing that nature. And so I absolutely love the adaptation. I can't say enough about it. What do you hope adults, because adults love children's books too, reading Magnolia Flower will get from it? And then what do you think children will get from it?
Children first. I think it's the type of story that'll make them feel good, not just the story itself, but just the beautiful illustrations by Lovis Wise. It could also cause them to ask questions. What is the Trail of Tears? What is slavery? Why did slavery happen? Why did Magnolia Flower's father not want her to be attached to this guy who didn't have much money. There's so many questions about class, about history, about race and racism that I think could propel young people to ask, uh, which I think is great. Adults will see there was a such thing as Afro-Indigenous people engaged in all sorts of resistance. They will learn even about maroon communities. I've had adults ask me, "Oh, what is a maroon?" I didn't even know there were maroon communities. And those who aren't familiar with those are communities where you had Black people and even Indigenous people who ran away from enslavement, particularly to mountain areas or swamps or deep in forests that were far away from uh, enslavers, and they built their own small communities, their own free communities. And there were larger maroon communities in places like Jamaica and Brazil, but there were small ones in the United States too. I suspect that's going to cause some adults to want to learn more. That's one of the things I wanted for this book, for the story itself, to capture people's curiosity.
I just want to give you a huge congratulations because I believe with Magnolia Flower, you are holding hands and walking with Zora in the work that is required to honor our ancestors in the African diaspora. Because just like you spoke, the Maroons are most popular from Jamaica, where Zora traveled to in 1936 as a Guggenheim Fellow, something that you two share in common, Guggenheim Fellowships, but really honoring the full diaspora, not just Black Southern people, Black Northern people. And so Magnolia Flower starts to make us ask those questions. Well, what diversity of history can we look into, even in the African diaspora within the United States and within the world? And how can we see iterations of ourselves, our heritage, and all have it boiled back down to love? So thank you so much for joining me today. Magnolia Flower is available and everyone should get it because it is an incredible work of artistry and a way to honor Zora. Dr. Kendi, do you have any final words you would like to share?
For me, the higher purpose of creating, or I should say adapting Magnolia Flower, is to honor Zora Neale Hurston. There are a number of ways we can honor our literary giants. And one of them is to figure out new ways to introduce their brilliance to a new generation. So I'm just excited that I've been a part of this project and that I had the opportunity to formally and publicly honor Zora Neale Hurston.